Please, don't judge me, she said, trembling. But the rancher untied the rope and froze in horror. The sun was sinking behind the hills when Merrick slowed his horse near the north pasture. The day had been long, the kind that left sweat drying on his shirt and dust caught in the folds of his hat. He was thinking only about a loose stretch of fence when a flicker of movement by the creek drew his eyes. At first he thought it might be a deer, but the shape was wrong. He swung down, tied the reins to a low branch, and stepped through the brittle grass. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. A young woman stood knee-deep in the water, her hair dark and slick against her back, shoulders taut as if she might run or fight. What was left of her dress clung in torn pieces, the fabric ragged around her ribs. Her feet were bare and scraped raw, bruises scattered along her arms. She held one arm across her chest, the other pointing to a patch of bank where scraps of cloth lay in the mud. Her voice cracked, rough from crying. "They stole my clothes. Please help me." Jack stayed still, weighing everything. Whoever had left her like this could be nearby. If he brought her home, there might be trouble later, but the fear in her eyes left him no choice. He shrugged out his coat and extended it slowly. "Here," he said quietly. She hesitated, searching his face for a trick, then snatched the coat and turned away, shoulders shaking as she pulled it tight. He offered his hand, careful not to startle her. When she let him help her out of the creek, he felt how cold her skin was despite the warm air. Scratches covered her legs. The neckline of her torn dress showed ribs too sharp for someone her age. Jack guided her toward the horse, lifting her gently when her knees buckled. She clung to the saddle horn while he mounted, then gripped the back of his shirt as if letting go would undo her safety. They rode in silence, the trail long and dusty. Jack didn't push the horse faster than she could bear. He could feel her shaking against him. When they reached his cabin, he slid off and steadied her as she climbed down. She almost collapsed, but caught herself on the porch rail. Inside, Jack lit a lantern. Yellow light spilled over the plain room. A table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed, and a stove stacked with wood. Since his wife's passing 3 years ago, he had kept it simple, easier not to let it feel like a home. He placed a folded blanket near the hearth. "You can sit here," he said. She obeyed, sinking close to the fire, still wrapped in his coat. Her eyes kept darting to the door, as if someone might burst through any second. Jack didn't press her with questions. He set a kettle over the fire, then fetched a small kit with a needle and thread. The dress was split nearly in half. He stitched it together with uneven but careful lines. She watched him work, as though trying to judge whether she could trust him. By the time he finished, warmth had settled in the cabin. Her trembling eased, though her gaze remained wary. Jack met her eyes for the first time since they'd come inside. He didn't know her name or who she was running from, but she was alive, safe for tonight. That would do for now. He leaned back against the wall, listening to the fire pop and shift. Tomorrow there would be questions, maybe a ride to town to see what trouble might follow. Tonight he stayed near, a rifle resting across his knees, eyes fixed on the door while she curled by the flames. He'd seen wounded soldiers, deserters, even outlaws before, but this felt different. When dawn seeped through the shutters, Jack stirred the fire. She blinked awake, pulling the coat closer as she sat up, her hair falling loose over her face. He poured water into a basin on the porch. "There's nobody around this early," he said gently. She hesitated, then nodded, stepping outside to splash her face. Rope burns crossed her shoulder where the coat slipped open, but she hid them fast. Jack kept his distance, chopping kindling so she wouldn't feel watched. Back inside, she settled near the hearth again, damp hair trailing down her back. He handed her a tin cup of coffee. She studied it a long moment before taking it. "You got a name?" he asked. "Leah," she whispered. He nodded. "Jack Merrick. You want to tell me what happened?" She sat quiet, hands wrapped around the cup. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat, almost too calm. 3 men, white boys. I crossed near town yesterday. They stopped me, laughed, took everything." She swallowed. "Clothes, food, all of it." Jack's jaw tightened. He thought of the drifters who hung near the saloon, always looking for someone weaker. Got kin nearby? No, her voice hardened. I came north for work. Nothing left south. That told him enough. He'd heard stories of burned-out camps after the army's push. She was lucky to be alive. Turning her out now would sign her death warrant. You can stay a while, Jack said at last. Till you decide where you're headed. Leah's dark eyes flicked to his, sharp with suspicion. Why? Because I got space, he said simply. And I don't leave people to starve on my doorstep. She didn't reply, only pulled the coat tighter and stared into the flames. Jack let the quiet stretch between them, only the fire crackling in the stove. He could see the way Leah's fingers trembled as they clutched the edge of the coat. Her knuckles were white, like she was still braced for someone to grab her. He kept his voice low, steady, the same tone he used with skittish horses. You're safe here, he said. Nobody's getting through that door tonight. Leah glanced up, her eyes dark and guarded, then back at the fire. She didn't answer, but the set of her shoulders softened just a little. Jack rose, poured more water into the kettle, and set it back over the flames. He didn't press her for more. Some wounds needed space before words could find them. When the coffee was ready, he handed her a cup and sat on the floor across from her. The heat from the mug seeped through her fingers, and after a long moment, she took a slow sip. Her gaze flicked toward him, searching again, as if she wasn't sure yet if he was real. Outside, the night deepened. Wind slipped through the cottonwoods, whispering against the walls. Jack felt every sound through his boots, the shift of the horse in the corral, the faint sigh of branches. He stayed alert, but let his body settle, wanting her to see that calm could live here too. When her eyes started to close, he eased a blanket around her shoulders. Sleep, he murmured. I'll keep watch. She hesitated, then curled on the rug near the hearth. For a while she lay stiff, staring at the door. But slowly, her breathing evened out, and she drifted into an uneasy rest. Jack stayed where he was, rifle across his knees, letting the firelight paint soft shapes across the walls. Morning came pale and cool. Leah stirred when Jack moved to stoke the coals. She pushed herself upright, rubbing at her eyes. The coat slipped from her shoulder, revealing more bruises and a deep red welt that circled her upper arm. She caught him looking and yanked the fabric closed, her face hardening. Jack said nothing about it. Instead, he nodded toward the table. I've got bread. Not much, but it's warm. She sat gingerly on the chair he pulled out. She ate slowly, eyes darting between the window and the door as if expecting someone to appear. Jack poured another cup of coffee and slid it across to her. You ride much? He asked, wanting to draw her mind somewhere else. Some, she murmured. Goats, not horses. He smiled faintly. We'll fix that. After breakfast, he fetched the dress he'd mended. The stitching wasn't pretty, but it would hold. He sat on the cot and turned his back while she changed. When she cleared her throat, he looked again. The dress fit better than before, though snug where he'd drawn the thread tight. She stood awkwardly, unsure where to put her hands. I've got chores, Jack said, reaching for his hat. You can rest here, or come with me if you'd rather not be alone. I'll come, she said quickly, as though the thought of staying inside made her chest close up. He saddled the horse, and they walked the fence line together. Leah stayed near, keeping quiet, watching how he tested each post and pulled the wires snug. She limped at first, careful with her cut feet, but before long she started carrying tools for him without being asked. By midday, the sun climbed high, pressing heat into the back of Jack's neck. He led the horse to water, and Leah knelt at the creek, rinsing dust from her legs. Jack saw how carefully she kept her back turned, not out of shyness, but because she wasn't ready to trust anyone at her side yet. You don't have to keep checking over your shoulder, he said quietly. She shook her head, not looking up. I watch for myself. They headed back as the sky started to change, blue fading to gold. Jack gave her a scrap of cloth and a needle, showing her how to patch a tear in an old shirt. She took the fabric without hesitation, sitting on the porch rail as she sewed. Her hands were steady, her face set with concentration. That night, after supper, Jack sat outside with his rifle balanced across his knees. Leah lay near the fire inside, but her breathing sounded deeper, calmer than it had the night before. He watched the tree line, ready for any sign of riders. For the first time since finding her, though, he felt something else slip in, the thought that maybe she was beginning to believe she wasn't alone anymore. As dusk settled over the hills, Jack checked the last of the corral rails. The horses moved lazily in the warm breeze, their tails flicking at flies. When he stepped inside, Leah was sweeping the floor with a bundle of twigs tied into a makeshift broom. Her hair had fallen loose from where she'd tied it, and she looked up quickly, like she wasn't sure she had the right to be caught cleaning. "You don't need to do that," Jack said, setting his hat on the peg. Her hands didn't pause. "I want to," she replied, her voice soft but firm. He watched her for a moment, realizing it wasn't about tidying the cabin. She was claiming space, proving to herself she had a place here. He let her keep sweeping while he set a pot of beans on the stove. The smell of wood smoke and supper filled the room, easing the edges of silence between them. Later, when the sun dropped low, they walked together along the far fence. Jack studied the ridges beyond, uneasy about the man who had hurt her. "You know their names?" he asked carefully. She hesitated, then nodded. "One called Clay," she said. "The others I don't know." Jack's brow furrowed. He'd heard of Clay Jensen, a ranch hand's boy who'd grown too wild, spending nights in the saloon until trouble found him. "If they come near here, you stay inside," he said, his voice steady. Leah's dark eyes held his. "You'd fight them?" "If I have to." They finished mending the fence as the last light faded. When they returned to the cabin, Jack struck a match and lit the lamp. Leah watched him closely, as if weighing whether to speak. Finally she asked, quiet but clear, "Will you take me to town?" "Not yet," he said after a pause. "Not until I'm sure it's safe." Something in her shoulders eased at that, a small release as if she'd feared he might send her away. Jack busied himself with supper, beans, and a little salt pork. Leah mended a torn work shirt at the table, her hands moving with a skill that surprised him. When she finished, she placed the shirt neatly in front of him. "You sew better than I do," Jack said with a faint smile. "My mother taught me," Leah murmured. When came time to sleep, Jack rolled out his bedroll on the floor. Leah looked at him with a flicker of surprise. "You're not taking the cot. It's yours tonight," he said simply. For a long moment she stood, as though deciding whether to trust the offer. Then she lay down, still wrapped in his coat. Jack stayed awake longer than he meant to, listening to the steady rhythm of her breath against the quiet of the cabin. He'd spent years sleeping light, waiting for danger to stir in the dark, but tonight the watchfulness felt different. Less about himself, more about guarding her. Before dawn, he slipped out to saddle the horse. The cool air smelled faintly of pine. When he returned, Leah was awake, sitting on the cot with the coat draped around her shoulders. "You're riding out?" she asked, wary. "Just to town," Jack said, adjusting the cinch. "Better I see who's talking than wait for them to show up here." Her jaw tightened. "Clay." "Maybe," he said. "Stay put. Bar the door. There's a rifle behind the table if you need it." She nodded once, pale but steady. The ride to town was quiet. The morning light painted the hills gold as Jack guided the horse along the muddy road. By the time he reached the main street, the place was just waking, a wagon stacked with hay, someone sweeping in front of the store. Jack tied his horse outside the saloon and stepped through the swinging doors. Inside, stale whiskey clung to the air. He bought a cup of coffee and sat where he could watch the room. It didn't take long to spot them. Two young men, laughter too loud, boots too new. Clay leaned back in his chair, that same sly grin Jack remembered from roundups years ago. Clay's gaze shifted, landing on Jack. The grin sharpened. "Look who wandered in," he said, just loud enough for the room. "Heard you've been keeping a little pet up at your place." Jack didn't blink. "You got something to say it." Clay's smile twitched. "She's a wild one. Should have seen her run." Jack rose slowly, set the tin cup aside, and let the silence stretch until even the bartender stilled. "Come near my land again," Jack said, his voice flat, "and you won't walk away." Clay's grin slipped, but he didn't look away. "You think you can keep her? I think you'd better finish that drink and ride the other direction." The bartender cleared his throat. "Boys, maybe step outside." Clay stared another beat, then spat near the stove and stalked out with his friend. Jack waited, watching through the window until they mounted up and disappeared down the street. He didn't like leaving them angry, but at least he knew their faces, and that meant he could be ready. Under a high, white sun, Jack rode back toward the hills, the smell of coffee and dust still clinging to his shirt. The town had offered no comfort. Only the sight of Clay's sly grin burned into his thoughts. By the time he reached the cabin, smoke curled from the chimney. Leah was outside, crouched near a small patch of earth, turning it with a stick like she meant to plant something there. When she saw him, she stood quickly, brushing dirt from her hands. "You saw them?" she asked, voice thin but steady. "I did," Jack said, sliding from the saddle. He kept his tone calm, though his shoulders still carried the tension from the saloon. "They'll come here." "Not yet," he answered. "They know I'm watching." Her shoulders eased a little, though her hands stayed knotted together. Jack carried the flour and coffee inside. "Come on, we'll make bread." She followed him in, washing her hands before kneading dough at the table. Her movements were careful at first, then more certain as she worked. Jack watched her hands press and fold, the way she frowned in concentration. There was something healing in the simple task, as if she was reclaiming pieces of herself with every turn of the dough. After the bread was in the oven, he brought the rifle over. "Time you learned how to handle this," he said. "Only if you need to." Leah's brows drew together, but she nodded. He showed her where the shells fit, how to set the safety, how to steady her aim. She listened, silent but intent, and when she tried herself, her hand stayed firm. Jack gave a small nod. "Good." That evening, they ate warm bread with beans, sitting close near the fire. Leah's knee brushed his where he sat on the floor. She didn't pull away. When Jack rose to check the latch, she watched him with a trust that hadn't been there the night he found her. Later, as the fire settled to embers, she spread her blanket closer to where he unrolled his bedroll. She didn't say anything about it, and neither did he. The quiet between them felt different now. Not hollow, but full of something unnamed. Just after sundown, Jack stepped out with a lantern. The breeze carried a faint scent of wood smoke that wasn't from their chimney. He froze, listening. The horses shifted restlessly in the corral, ears flicking toward the ridge. Inside, Leo was clearing dishes. When he came back, his expression made her stop. "What is it?" she asked. "Smoke," he said softly. "Someone's camped close." Leah's face tightened. Her glance slid toward the rifle near the door. "Could be just drifters," Jack said, though he didn't believe it. He checked the rifle, then nodded to the lamp. "Blow that out." She did, plunging the room into the dim glow of the fire. Jack moved to the porch, crouching low. An hour dragged by before shapes shifted near the fence line. Two figures, keeping low. Not strangers, not hunters. Too careful for that. Jack slipped back inside. "Two of them," he murmured. Leah stood near the hearth, pale but steady. "Clay." "Don't know yet," Jack said. "If they try for the horses, I'll meet them there. You stay behind the door." She swallowed, squared her shoulders. "I'll be ready." The next stretch felt endless. A horse snorted outside, followed by the scrape of boots on dry earth. A low laugh drifted through the dark. Jack's hand tightened on the rifle. When a shadow moved near the corral gate, he stepped out fast, barrel leveled. "Leave the gate," he called, voice sharp as iron. The figures froze. Moonlight caught Clay's face, hat tilted low but grin still curling at the edges. "Evening, Merrick," he said, too casual. "Just passing through." "You're a long way from the saloon," Jack replied. "Turn around." Clay didn't budge. "Heard you've got company. Thought we'd see for ourselves." "You've seen enough." Jack kept the rifle steady. "Go." One of the others shifted nervously. "Come on, Clay. Ain't worth it." Clay stared a moment longer, spit in the dirt, then backed off. "You can't keep her forever. Watch me." Jack's voice held no tremor. They faded into the trees. Jack waited until silence settled, then lowered the rifle and went back inside. Leah was crouched by the door, clutching her own weapon. Her breath was fast, but her gaze clear. "They gone," she whispered. "For now." Jack set the bar back in place. She laid the rifle down carefully, then crossed her arms tight over her chest. "They'll come again." "Maybe," he said, meeting her eyes. "But they know I'm waiting." Leah stepped closer to the fire, staring into it as though trying to read her own future in the flames. "You could send me away," she said quietly. "No more trouble for you." Jack leaned against the doorframe, shaking his head. "Trouble's not you, Leah. It's them. Running won't fix it." Something shifted in her face then, a small but certain change. She didn't speak thanks, that wasn't her way, but she reached for the coat he'd given her that first night and wrapped it around herself again. The fear was still there, but steadier now, layered with trust. Rain swept in the next evening, soft at first and then steady, drumming on the roof until the sound filled every corner of the cabin. Jack set a lamp on the table and worked a knife over the handle of an old shovel, shaping new wood while Leah sat on the cot, brushing her wet hair with careful fingers. The light caught the marks still faint on her shoulder, reminders of the rope she had worn when he found her. She looked at him after a long silence. "You stood up for me," she said quietly. Jack didn't raise his eyes from the wood. "I couldn't let them take more from you." Leah studied the flames, her hands resting in her lap. "You could have told me to leave." "I told you before," Jack said, putting the knife aside. "I don't leave folks to fight alone." She stood, moving closer until she was right in front of him. The smell of smoke clung to her hair. "You still look away," she whispered. Jack lifted his head, meeting her gaze. "Trying to do right by you." Her lips pressed together, unsure. Then she took his rough hand and set it against her shoulder where the burn had been. The skin was healing, soft but scarred. "It doesn't hurt now," she said. Jack let his fingers rest there, slow and steady. "You sure?" She nodded once. He brushed a strand of hair back from her cheek, and this time she didn't flinch. "You're safe here," he told her. "I know," she breathed. When he kissed her, it wasn't quick or harsh. It was careful, almost shy, like he wanted to give her the chance to pull back. But she didn't. She leaned in, one hand holding the fabric of his shirt. Later they shared a quiet meal. Leah stayed close, shoulders touching his as they ate. When it was time to sleep, Jack didn't unroll his bedding on the floor. He sat at the edge of the cot, waiting. Leah slid over without a word, making space. They lay side by side, not touching at first. The rain softened, and the air smelled of wet earth. Slowly Leah shifted until her head rested near Jack's shoulder. He let out a breath he hadn't noticed, holding and set his hand lightly over hers. For the first time since she had come, it felt like the cabin might hold more than just a place to hide. Morning came clean and cool. Leah's hair lay across Jack's arm when he woke. She opened her eyes without a start, just a steady look that made something warm settle in his chest. After breakfast, Jack saddled the horse. "I need to ride into town," he said. Leah's calm faded a little. "You want me to stay?" "You can come if you want," Jack said. "But if you do, stay close." She hesitated, then nodded. "I'll come." The road was muddy from the rain, so they went slow. Leah held on to the back of his shirt, not in fear, but steadying herself. When they reached the main street, people glanced their way. Jack kept his eyes forward, leading her to the store. Inside, Leah stayed near while Jack ordered flour, sugar, coffee nails. The storekeeper wrapped each item without comment, though his eyes slid toward her now and then. Leah kept her chin high, but her hands clasped tight in front of her. Another man stepped in, about Clay's age. Leah froze, shoulders stiff. Jack moved a little, placing himself between her and the door. "You got a problem?" he said calmly. The man raised both hands. "No trouble, Merrick." When they left, Leah let out a slow breath. "You didn't look away," she said. "Wouldn't have mattered if I did," Jack replied. "People see what they want. Let them." They stopped by the blacksmith before heading home. Jack caught talk between two men. Clay had been thrown out of the saloon the night before, shouting about the woman at Merrick's place. Jack said nothing until they were clear of town. "Word's out," he said. Leah kept her eyes on the road ahead. "Then they'll come." "Maybe," Jack answered. "But we'll be ready." Back at the cabin, Leah helped unload supplies. She swept the floor, started a pot of beans, and later carried laundry to the creek. Jack watched her kneel by the water, washing cloth with firm, sure strokes. "You not running?" he asked. I ran before, she said. No more. That evening they sat on the porch as the sky turned gold. Jack rested his rifle across his knees, and Leah sat close enough that her shoulder brushed his sleeve. They stared in town, she murmured. They can stare, Jack said. It doesn't change a thing. Leah looked up at him, something like relief softening her face. She placed her hand over his on his knee. He turned his palm, letting their fingers fit together. When they went inside, Leah moved toward the cot first. Jack sat down beside her, and for the first time she reached out to him, steady and sure. The next 2 days passed in a quiet that felt both heavy and calm. Jack worked close to the cabin, fixing loose rails and stacking wood, always keeping the rifle propped within reach. Leah stayed near, moving between small chores, hanging laundry, tending the garden patch, stirring beans over the stove. She didn't speak much, but every so often her eyes slid toward the tree line, watchful, as if the shadows themselves might turn into riders. By the third afternoon, the sky burned orange as the sun dipped low. Jack was stacking firewood when the sound of hooves split the calm. 3 horses, fast and close. He froze, setting the last log down slow, ears straining. Leah, he called, his voice low but firm. She was already on the porch, hands gripping the rifle he'd left by the door. Her face had gone pale, but her jaw was set. Jack took the gun from her, checked the chamber, then handed it back. Stay by the door, he said. I'll stand here, she replied. Jack didn't argue. He stepped down into the yard, rifle loose but ready. Dust rose along the road as Clay and 2 others came into view, slowing only when they reached the clearing. They stopped just far enough that Jack had to raise his voice to meet them. You're trespassing, he called out. Clay grinned from the saddle, eyes sharp beneath his hat. Easy, Merrick. We just came to talk. Talk from there, Jack answered. Clay swung off his horse, boots scuffing in the dirt as he took a few steps closer. You got no right keeping her up here like she's yours, he said. Jack felt a muscle jump in his jaw. She's not yours either. The second rider spat into the dust. She don't belong here. You know it. She stays where she wants, Jack said, voice flat as stone. Clay tilted his head, a mocking smile curling. Does she? Or is she too scared to run? A faint creak came from the porch. Leah had stepped just inside the door. Her voice, when it came, was steady, louder than Jack had ever heard it. I stay here, she said. Clay's grin faltered, replaced by a tight look. Girl, you don't know what you're saying. I know. Leah's hands held the rifle firm. You took my clothes. You laughed. I won't run again. The yard went still, the air thick with heat and dust. Clay's face hardened as he stepped forward, but Jack raised the rifle, steady and sure. Mount up, he ordered. For a heartbeat. No one moved. Then one of the others backed toward his horse, murmuring, Come on, Clay. Clay spat, eyes locked on Jack. This ain't over. It is if you keep riding, Jack replied. Clay hesitated, then swung into the saddle. They wheeled their horses, dust trailing behind as they rode off slow at first, then faster down the trail. Jack watched until the sound of hooves faded into the hills, then lowered the rifle. When he turned, Leah was still by the door, hands tied on the stock of the gun. Her chest rose and fell quickly, but her gaze didn't waver. You all right? Jack asked gently. She nodded, though her grip stayed tense. They won't stop. Maybe not, he said, stepping closer. But now they know you've got someone standing with you. Her fingers loosened, and she set the rifle back near the wall. For a moment she stood, looking at him as if weighing something unspoken. Then she crossed the porch, placing one palm flat against his chest. You stood for me, she said. Jack nodded, meeting her eyes. Every time. Her hand lingered, curling into the fabric of his shirt, tugging him nearer. He didn't hesitate. He bent his head, kissing her, not careful this time, but sure. Leah leaned into him, the tension in her shoulders melting at last. That night, they sat close by the fire while Jack cleaned the rifle. He set it within easy reach, then glanced at Leah. If they come again, we might have to talk to the sheriff, he said. Make it official. She tilted her head. Official means they can't touch you without paying for it, Jack explained. Leah was quiet for a long while, staring at the flames. Finally, she nodded. Then we'll go. Later, as darkness folded around the cabin, Leah pressed close to him on the cot, her head resting beneath his chin. Jack laid a hand across her back, steady and warm. For the first time since finding her, he let himself think past the next sunrise, past fences and rifles, to a life where she stayed not because she had nowhere else, but because she wanted to. Outside, crickets sang, and the night felt solid, no longer fragile with fear. A line had been drawn, and for now, it held. The morning after the standoff, a pale sky stretched over the hills. Jack saddled the horse early, breath curling white in the cool air. On the porch, Leah stepped out, braids neat, the mended dress sitting clean against her frame. She watched him tighten the cinch, quiet but steady. "You going to town?" she asked. "Best to end this before it starts again," Jack said. "Want to ride along?" Her answer came after a heartbeat. "Yes, I'm coming." They rode slow, not hiding, just two people on a muddy trail. Leah sat straight behind him, her hands light on the back of his shirt. The morning sun caught the wet grass, sending sparks of light across the valley. Jack felt the tension in her fingers, but also the strength behind it. When they reached town, eyes followed them. A store clerk stepping outside, a pair of ranch hands pausing near the well. Jack didn't return a single stare. He helped Leah down, steadying her with one hand, and pushed open the sheriff's door. Inside, Sheriff Evans looked up from a stack of papers. He was in his 50s, lines etched deep at the corners of his eyes. "Merrick," he said, then glanced toward Leah. "Heard a bit of talk." "You heard right," Jack replied, voice even. "Clay Jensen and two others came to my place at night. Try to spook my horses. Threaten her." The sheriff leaned back, sighing through his nose. "Clay's been trouble before. I'll ride out, speak to his father." "That won't be enough," Jack said quietly. "If they set foot on my land again, it won't be talk next time." Evans studied him, then nodded slowly. His gaze moved to Leah. "You want to press charges?" Leah stood taller. "I want them to stay away," she said. "A man took my clothes, my food, even my name. I don't want them near me again." The sheriff's face softened. "We can make that happen. I'll write it down proper." When they stepped back onto the boardwalk, Leah stood still for a moment, looking down the street. Two men leaned by the livery, whispering. This time she didn't drop her gaze. On the ride home she stayed quiet, but not with the same tightness as before. Her hands rested easy at Jack's waist. He felt a small shift, like a storm breaking far off. At the cabin, Leah helped untie the parcels. She swept the floor, started a stew, then went down to the creek to wash the dust from their clothes. Jack watched from the porch as she knelt on the rocks, sleeves rolled, hands steady against the current. "You're certain about staying?" he asked when he joined her. Leah looked up, eyes calm. "I was running before," she said simply. "Not now." That evening, they ate the stew and shared bread still warm from the stove. Leah braided her hair, fingers moving with quiet grace. She held up the comb Jack had bought her weeks before. "You gave me this," she said softly. "You fixed my dress. You stood for me." "What?" Jack set down the spoon, meeting her eyes. "Because I want you here," he said. "Not because you're cornered. Because you choose it." Leah didn't speak right away. Then she nodded, a slow, sure motion. "I choose." She crossed the room, kneeling near his chair, and took his hand. "I stay." Jack's throat tightened, but he returned the squeeze of her fingers. "Then we build something worth keeping." After supper they sat outside. Stars burned sharp above, and the air smelled of grass and cooling earth. Leah leaned against his shoulder, her breathing even. "They won't come back," she murmured. "Not if they know what's waiting," Jack said, resting his arm around her. For a long while they stayed there, the cabin behind them warm with lamplight. Jack thought about the first night by the creek, about the bruises and the fear. Those things weren't gone, but they no longer owned her. When they finally went inside, Leah settled on the cot without hesitation. Jack stretched out beside her, and this time there was no space between them. Her head fit under his chin, and his hand found its place at her back. Outside, the night hummed with crickets and the far-off howl of a coyote. Inside, everything felt steady, not just shelter against the world, but a home they were learning to share. The next morning broke clear, the sky washed clean after the storm. Jack stepped outside to check the fence, boots sinking a little in the damp soil. When he turned back, Leah was standing on the porch with a small sack of seeds he bought in town. Sunlight caught the quiet smile playing at the edge of her mouth. "Thought we could plant these," she said, holding the sack out. Jack felt something settle inside him, a stillness he hadn't known in years. "Let's do it." They knelt side by side in the soft dirt, hands working carefully. Leah's fingers traced the rows with a care that spoke of more than planting. She was laying down roots, claiming a piece of earth that could hold her story. Jack dug the holes, steady and sure, while she dropped each seed and brushed soil over it. They worked without hurry, the sound of birds threading through the quiet morning. When they finished, Leah sat back on her heels, wiping her palms on her dress. "I didn't think I'd ever stop running," she said softly. Jack leaned on the handle of the spade, watching her. "You don't have to anymore," he said. "Not here." She looked at him, eyes steady. "You're not afraid they'll come again?" "I've been afraid plenty," Jack replied. "But I've learned fear's just a signal. It tells you what matters enough to stand for." Leah's gaze dropped to the freshly turned soil, then back to him. "That's worth standing for," she said. They spent the rest of the morning tending small chores, hanging a line for laundry, setting out feed for the horse, sweeping the porch together. Simple work, but it felt like building something bigger than either of them alone. That night, after supper, they sat on the steps as the stars came out. The air smelled of earth and cooling wood smoke. Leah leaned against Jack's side, her head fitting under his shoulder as if it had always belonged there. She spoke after a long silence. "When you found me, I didn't believe anyone would help without wanting something back. I thought trust was gone." Jack looked at her, his hand resting lightly at her back. "Sometimes the world tries to teach you to expect the worst," he said. "But you get to decide if you'll stay in that lesson or write a new one." Leah was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "I want to write a new one." He smiled, slow and warm. "Then we start right here." The moon rose pale above the ridge, washing silver over the cabin and the new planted ground. Jack felt Leah's fingers slide into his, a sure, easy grip. He understood, then, what this place meant, not just a roof or a refuge, but proof that broken things could be mended if someone cared enough to try. And that standing beside another soul, even when it cost you something, was the only way to make a life worth living. Leah shifted closer, laying her head against him. "Feels like home," she whispered. "It is," Jack said, tightening his arm around her. "Home's where you both choose to stay." They sat there until the night cooled around them, the stars steady overhead. Whatever came down the trail tomorrow, they would meet it together, not as strangers, not as rescuer and runaway, but as two people who had learned that kindness and courage could build a life stronger than fear.